The Rey Fenix vs. Will Ospreay series is certainly one of the most exciting pairings in recent times for fans of high-flying, super-athletic pro wrestling. They're arguably the best aerialists of the 2010s, although Ricochet might argue that he's king, and Dragon Lee and today's best flyer, El Hijo del Vikingo, were quite spectacular soaring athletes who came on at the end of that decade. Undoubtedly, Rey and Will are era-defining high flyers with virtually unrivaled athleticism who love delivering mind-blowing athletic spots. Fenix has such amazing balance. He's great at taking a pre-existing move and putting his own spin on it, whether by incorporating it into his tightrope act or adding a forward roll. Will is less creative, but has incredible explosion. He'll give you the picture-perfect gymnastics execution of all his flying, really tight and precise movement through his mid-air twists and turns, with a well-balanced landing. Aerial wrestling might not be the best style to pit the standouts against each other. Certainly putting grappling aces such as Kiyoshi Tamura and Volk Han, or Johnny Saint and Steve Gray together, enabled them to do a lot more elaborate, high-speed, tricked-out sequences that really went above and beyond what they could accomplish with most other people. Lucha Libre is based upon pitting a high flyer against a sturdy base who can set them up and catch them well, for a reason though. With an aerial matchup like this, I'm not necessarily looking for the best all-around match, or too worried about how well they are able to dabble into the areas that aren't their strengths. I'm looking for them to find a way to push the boundaries of what they excel at. If they can show me a match where having a quicker, faster, more athletic opponent allows them to do things they couldn't otherwise do with an ordinary wrestler who understands how to make them look good, I consider that a success. By this standard, Fenix and Ospreay have very much succeeded in at least their first and third matches. To me, these matches are about showing something that hasn't been done before, taking that next step forward in the evolution, and hopefully inspiring others to take a step beyond what Fenix and Ospreay are able to do now. The better Fenix vs. Ospreay matches are largely just two of the best high flyers in the world displaying their ridiculous athleticism in a game of top disc that features some incredible athletic sequences and counters that are outrageous in the best possible way. They are wild aerial spectacles without much connective tissue, where they are so creative that they could just keep a sequence of running and jumping at each other going on for as long as they want to, because something breathtaking will continue to transpire. Pac is a high flyer who can have a reasonable match with anyone. He largely just keeps jumping at an opponent who is required to do little more than stand or lay there, so even the most inept robots who are usually confused and don't have a single move that looks remotely impressive, such as perpetual rookie-level worker Kazuchika Okada, almost can't screw up a Pac match, at least until they cut him off. Even with Pac doing some of the most impressive flips around though, this sort of match still isn't likely to be of more than marginal interest unless he has a real opponent who is at least answering him with a lot of their own well-done offense. The better Will vs. Rey matches are quite developed in terms of how they work together. What these Rey vs. Will matches offer are two performers who can react beautifully to one another. The matches are at their most exciting when they fully embrace what they do well against an opponent who can do it equally as well, and try to take that athletic bend to the highest level they can within the time they have. They are mirror matches where they keep countering each other back and forth until someone finally outmaneuvers the other to land one flying move. It's more about all the flips and rolls they evade than what finally actually works. You may or may not like this style of match, but it's their match, decked out in all its glory. These matches might not have a lot to offer in other areas, but there aren't many matches where their opponent can also backflip out of the way or land on their feet for an avalanche move. The more these matches were truly aerial wars, the better they were. The more they were just leaping at one another, or thinking about doing the great match by numbers style, where they just parrot whatever has gotten other people high ratings in the past, even though they don't actually do it very well, the worse their matches were. Their first battle from September 2nd, 2016, a first-round match in PWG's Battle of Los Angeles 2016, still has that awe factor. This match yanks you into their video game world, where they just constantly impress with their stunts. A lot of the spins, twists, turns, rolls, and rope hops don't make the actual move do any more damage, and would of course realistically just make the move more difficult to execute. This match was just so crazy, and the pacing was so high, that they were nonetheless able to pull me into their world, get me to shut my brain off and enjoy the spectacle. This only lasted 10 minutes 29 seconds, but it actually felt much longer in a good way, because they worked full speed, cramming so much amazing spectacle into the time they had. They basically eliminated everything that wasn't athletic action, at their best doing elaborate counter sequences filled with flips and rolls to avoid whatever the other could throw at them, until they finally couldn't. They would also mirror each other by doing their own variation out of the same setup. This wasn't a well-rounded match, and sometimes even within the one dimension they were delivering, they were content to just jump at one another when they could have developed things more interestingly. But they didn't waste any time, and basically didn't do anything that wasn't spectacular. Initially, they displayed their variation out of the same setup. For instance, Will forward flipped over a grounded Fenix, but Fenix jumped on a grounded Will's back with a foot stomp. They varied more in the second half through their counters. Will was much more spectacular than he is today, including a space-flying tiger drop. Fenix answered with a tornado. After all this crazy stuff, they randomly paused in the middle, creating their own commercial break through Will applying a chinlock. Fenix escaped with an overhead kick, and they went back to jumping at one another for the rest of the match. Will tried for a back body drop, but Fenix flipped into a hurricanrana, only to have Will cartwheel out. The most memorable, truly incredible spot came when Fenix tried an avalanche Spanish fly, but both landed on their feet. Will got his feet up for the 450 splash, though Fenix almost missed them, and won with the Os Cutter. This was kind of a standard finish given all the crazy stuff they'd already done, albeit still miles better than what we've gotten since Will's Hidden Blade era. This could have been more developed to be certain, but they just did highlights from start to finish, so at this length, it didn't become overkill. This match wasn't remotely believable, but they gave people more or less what they wanted, an incredible athletic exhibition, even if not much else. I give this match 4 stars out of 5. Their second match took place on March 31st, 2017 at the RevPro WrestleCon show. WrestleCon is always exciting for being a great gathering of the top indie wrestlers in smaller leagues, but one of the problems is by packing so many shows into WrestleMania weekend, you wind up getting lesser matches because both wrestled another match on this day, and Rey had 2 matches the next day, while Will had 1. Though this was longer than their previous match at 12 minutes 41 seconds, it wasn't as urgent or creative. They didn't actually do as much, and very little of what they did took advantage of the great athlete they were working with. Mostly they just did their routine, and thus either could have had a better match with a good base and feeder. It was more conventional and less breathtaking. Of course, they still did some amazing athletic stuff, but it wasn't an all-out match, or nearly as consistent, and it definitely didn't build upon or add to what they'd done before. This was more in line with the worst aspects associated with indie wrestling, as both did really cool things, but the setup was slower and more predictable, and both were individually a lot more impressive than they were working with one another. They tried to do a more conventional opening this time, rather than just getting to the good stuff, but it wasn't particularly impressive, or much more believable than the rest of what they did. The match took off after a few minutes when Fenix used it to Harris to set up a dive. They were exchanging flashy athletic moves at a high pace for the rest of the match. Rey avoided a superstar move, so Will just backflipped onto his feet, but Rey did a forward roll into a jumping cutter. They exchanged poison ranas. Generally in this program, Fenix was the more impressive of the two, even though Will doesn't put him over that well. At best, they would do 55-45 matches in Will's favor that Will would just kind of win without Fenix ever getting a truly believable near fall. This was Fenix's least impressive performance of the series though, as he seemed a little off his game, with Ospreay definitely standing out as the more impressive wrestler, especially in the final minutes. Will did a space-flying tiger drop and got a near fall with a Phoenix splash. Fenix took a great bump on the Os Cutter finisher to make it look like he got spiked on his head. They were individually impressive, but they didn't really need one another to do what they did here. I give this match 3 stars. After 2 matches in America, their third match for FCP on April 20th, 2019 took place at the Hangar in Wolverhampton, England. While still far from their perfect match together, this was the best example of them taking advantage of what the other is capable of. It's their most creative match, and when they were moving, they were doing an ungodly series of athletic counters and reversals. The match was arguably even more deeply flawed than their others. It sometimes annoyed me when they weren't moving, but this was aerial excess like we really haven't seen before, so I'm more interested in focusing on its unique sequences and appreciating its originality. In the limited scope of the match, I thought they worked the spots into the sequences incredibly well, using their athleticism to avoid everything the opponent was throwing at them as much as to land their own stuff. This wasn't the usual standing around watching the opponent jump at them. They did long, elaborate sequences where it took a lot of effort to counter and avoid all the many twists, turns, and flips in order to actually land anything. They teased their big spots well, avoiding them the first time then landing them later. The pacing of the match was bad though, with the match just stopping for an even lamer than usual version of the fighting spirit striking nonsense. This match was very choreographed, but the set pieces were fantastic. Even though everything was done for show, you don't really see these sort of sequences from anyone else, so the match was unique and original. The problem is between the set pieces, Rey would just stand or lie around for no reason, and Will would slowly get around to throwing a strike. Sometimes they would do a bad exchange, but either way, there was no urgency or resistance to any of this, the complacency killing all the momentum they just built up through the great counter sequence. The fact that they were killing time with the striking stuff made the sequences more jarring. It's what made them feel like set pieces, rather than something organically occurring within a kinetic action sequence. These weren't the great, on-the-fly audibles in the midst of a frantic and urgent sequence of aerial action they should have been. It was standing around staring at each other, then running around again for no reason. The sequences were really elaborate, but ultimately, they ended with one move being hit, so there was no reason for Rey playing dead, other than that they needed a break after all those flips and rolls. The fact that it was always Rey playing dead, and a match that he was once again losing, gave the appearance that Will was coming out on top of all the sequences, even though it was theoretically the typical 50-50 match. The opening running counter sequence was actually the best part of the match. Just an incredible start with both cartwheeling out of Tijeras, Will handstanding his way out of a superstar cutter, and Rey eventually ducking a penalty kick and doing a kip up. Rey tried to do his rope hopping, but Will kicked the top rope to knock him off. Rey eventually came back with more rope work, answering Will's attempt to knock him off this time, and hitting a missile kick, then a moonsault to the floor. Will avoided the rolling soul butt in the corner, but Rey stopped him with a chop, backflipped over him, and hit a German suplex. Will hit the superstar enziguri this time. Rey avoided a moonsault off the second, and a standing moonsault, got hit with a shooting star press, then avoided another moonsault off the second. Ospreay then avoided a moonsault off the second, and Rey hit his cutter. None of the selling in this match was remotely convincing, they were just pausing and restarting. Pretty much everything that was avoided early on was eventually hit later on. Will landed on his feet for the Avalanche Frankensteiner, but then they just stood around admiring their work. Rey handspringed out of a tornado DDT. The ending of this was really random and out of nowhere. Will hit a corkscrew moonsault to the floor, Rey hit his backfire driver, then Will caught Rey's moonsault attack off the second and hit his Stormbreaker for the win. Ultimately, while this was their longest match at 15 minutes 19 seconds, their shortest match on September 2nd, 2016 still felt like their most complete display of what they can actually do. They had improved as wrestlers by this point though, and this was their highest level match in terms of skill and level of difficulty. I think it's both their best and worst match in a lot of ways. It's definitely a lot more frustrating than their PWG match, but it also takes the sequences a lot further than that match does, and feels like an evolution, even if at the same time, the strong style influence led to a de-evolution. There's a lot of memorable stuff here because so much had to occur to get to the point of them actually landing something cool. I'm rating it highly, and calling it their best match, because you just can't find this level of athletic sequence elsewhere, even in their other matches. But I could see where people might prefer the purity and simplicity of the PWG match because it's bloat-free. I give this match 4 stars. Their latest match took place in AEW on June 12, 2024 in Des Moines, Iowa, for Will's AEW International Title. It was something of a lesser version of their FCP match. It's a nice introduction to what they can do together, especially for an audience that likely hasn't seen it before. But unfortunately this series still doesn't really have a signature match that truly captures the heights they are capable of reaching together. They did some things better here, but the commercial breaks resulted in it still being a stop and start match. With this style, the stopping and starting, whether because they need a break or due to the bad TV format, is really jarring because they don't lay out a match well to begin with, resulting in an uneven feeling match that keeps shifting between 0 and 100 miles per hour. The opening segment of athletic counters was pretty much right out of the FCP match, although that was their best stuff ever, well worth repeating. Rey avoided a pescado after Will took too long playing to the crowd. Rey seemed to be stepping through the ropes to go get Will on the outside, but instead jumped off the bottom rope with a Frankensteiner. This was a great start, but then, as always, the match lost all its steam with the first picture-in-picture. This semi-interrupted segment was only notable for being the only control segment Rey had during their 4-match series. There was at least more urgency once they would come back from the commercials. They gained momentum again with Will hitting the superstar enziguri and landing on his feet for an avalanche Frankensteiner, and Rey handspringing out of a tornado DDT, only to get stopped in their tracks with the second picture-in-picture. By the time they returned, they moved into the finishing sequence, countering each other's signature spots. Rey cut off the hidden blade with a hurricanrana, but Will cut Fenix off in midair with a hidden blade, then took forever giving Swerve Strickland, who was at ringside, his "My House" catchphrase, before hitting Swerve's finisher, the Swerve Stomp, then winning with another hidden blade. Most of the variation in this match was towards the end because Ospreay has different finishers these days. This wasn't as spectacular as their first or third matches, partially because Will especially isn't as spectacular as he used to be, and certainly wasn't as groundbreaking or original. Though it was safer and more conventional, it was still a lot of fun, and might have been an excellent match under better circumstances. I give this match 3.5 stars. These matches aren't likely to stand the test of time as well as more well-rounded matches because their flying will be surpassed, while solid wrestling tends to always be solid wrestling. Their better matches together are among the most spectacular matches these two have had, though. Neither set each other up, or cover some of the other aspects as well as their better opponents who aren't so similar do, but it's nice that we don't have to choose between always seeing mirror matches or always seeing fire and ice, because both can be exciting and move the bar in their own ways.